Special pleading happens when you can't win an argument by logic. Someone's asked me to do an apples-to-apples comparison between two things that I can actually do this with because they didn't assume I would look up the total tonnage of water in the Pacific Ocean this week. Let's continue. CO2 concentrations in previous millennia detected using the same methodology we use now to double check, and then other methods that we can only use then and using them in today's air just to make sure we're not full of it, and compensating where we find out we have errors using dozens of different methods to make sure we're good at it. Versus, I don't like hearing this, so global warming is a conspiracy that started hundreds of years ago. It was 288 parts per million about 1,000 years ago. Over 5,000 to 20,000 years, it'll change 100 parts per million up and down. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, however, it's gone up from 280 parts per million, to 405 parts per million. Okay, that works out to 125 parts per million. In the last 120 years, it's changed the 100 parts per million, which means the previous, 1,000 years was only 25 parts per million, which is about right. That's 25 parts per million. You get 100 every 5,000, bare minimum, but that's actually pretty high considering the range. It should be a lot lower than that. That's 50 to 150 times faster over the last 120 years than it should be by any rational person's measurement. So let's not talk rational, I guess. This is showing as a cumulative imbalance that won't fucking go away no matter how much you bitch, outside of the natural carbon cycle, which uses a specific set of characteristics we can test because there's no exemptions when we test in the environment. I'll get to that in a minute. The natural carbon exchange has failed to absorb all of the additional CO2, and this is the cumulative effect of approximately a little under 1 part per million per year for the last 100 years. Sometimes much higher, sometimes almost nothing. So you can look at any particular year to win any argument you want to, but it keeps happening, and it's a specific trend, and it matches what we're seeing, and it does match the temperature curve. And yes, Al Gore was wrong, but that's not relevant. And again, emphasis added, the methodologies that we can only use for shit that happened 1,000 years ago to maybe 500 years ago to maybe 100 years ago, you can use those methods. Currently, there's no exclusion. You can use them to test to see if they work currently for the last 50 years, the current year. You can also use methods that only work now and kind of see if they apply at all and find some spotty evidence that shows that there isn't any disparity here. There is consensus with the test results. This isn't an argument I'm willing to have anymore because people will make up every fucking escape hatch to get out of this. But this is claimed to be a very tiny change. Now remember, there are feedback loops that can happen, like a warm ocean producing more CO2 and refusing to absorb more. This can be caused by the plant life and the animal life. Just like in the air, you can have this from forests doing the same thing, acting in the same way in the air supply. You also have volcanoes in the ocean or vents and volcanoes on land doing these things. But taking all of these into account, we're still seeing this change. You'd have to prove there's a consistent upswing for 100 years when we still have human history and records and it don't match. And yes, you can look up when an earthquake and volcanism happened in the past because they leave some evidence behind. Same thing with forest fires. This has been done already to death. Knock it the fuck off, okay? And other cumulative effects that we can test. The testable accumulated heat baseline on Earth works out to 2 watts extra per square meter consistently. It doesn't change every 11 years like the 1 watt or half watt change that happens from the solar cycle that is not causing a grand solar minimum or maximum of heat, just the grand solar minimum or maximum of sunspot activity. They don't cause the weather. It's not the fucking sun. We measure the wattage from the sun. People do this all the fucking time, outside and inside the atmosphere. Shut the fuck up. So this cumulative heat effect we can measure as being the equivalent to 2 watts extra per square meter is a little significant. That's a lot of wattage over a fucking planet. And it's buildup. It's being retained. How much CO2 in the air, in the system, through the oceans, the air, the forests, the plankton, the plants and animals, the whole thing. 750 gigatons total that's in flux. Not synced in continually. It's synced and released. Synced and released. This includes forest fires. This includes a whole damn thing. Okay? So humans are supposed to be not able to affect this. And the claim by people is that it's 1% or whatever. Well, we'll work it out. We got almost 30 gigatons of CO2 added by humans to the system per year. Less than half of it's actually removed, so we end up with, I'm going to claim 15 gigatons to 17 gigatons accumulative effect. This is only effect that's estimated. We know how much is absorbed because we can test this. The rest of it is based on being allowed to test sources for CO2, because some of them say, get off my land, or you're not allowed to put a scrubber tester, or you're not allowed to check it because you're a filthy liberal. And when the exemptions die off, we find out later, because they had to make the recordings anyway, that it was 32 gigatons instead of the 29 gigatons in 2008. No, that's actually a lie, too. It wasn't 32 gigatons instead of 29 gigatons in 2008. It was an additional 32 gigatons. It's underreported by over 50%. And the atmosphere is still only able to absorb less than 15 gigatons that year. That means it's a massive increase. But we're going to keep it at 15 gigatons, 17 gigatons. Let's say 16. Something like that. Around 2% CO2 change in a 75 gigaton CO2 system, when it really is around 10%. But we're going to call it 2% because you want this to be a very minimal effect on humans doing this. 46 to 1 is also a ratio I've seen. But that's minimum. Let's call it 2%. 1%. Okay. During the accident at the uranium-fueled Fukushima plant 2011, it grew so hot that some of it is believed to have melted through the reactor steel floors and possibly into the basement underneath. Probably did, obviously. 40,000 gallons or 151 tons of groundwater a day flooded in and had to be processed or released into the ocean. 1,320 tons of low-level radioactive waste did go into the ocean. Later, the radioactive water was found leaking into the Pacific as well, not just these other things. After they knew it was happening, it decreased significantly because they started mitigating it, mostly by diverting and piping it. They just stuck pumps everywhere as best they could. 2016, they erected an ice wall, and there's also a steel wall to keep this from getting into the ocean as much. Or is it? I mean, obviously, they're trying to kill everybody because that's the meme you're going to see on the internet. They're deliberately dumping it because that's going to kill everybody. 300 tons of radioactive material or water with diluted radioactive matter is supposed to be dumped into the ocean. This is the claim. Coincidentally, during all of this time, 300 tons, coincidentally, was circulated through damaged or melted or functional sections of the reactors. But that, that's complications. Let's just round it out to 300 tons. Obviously, something terrible had to happen to it. Coincidentally, since 2013 or earlier, more than 1 million tons of accumulated, contaminated, cooling pipe water that had to be diverted and accumulated to more than 1,000 tanks. 1 million tons of it by 2019. Now, let's say this is from 2013 only. That's 6 years or 21,000 days approximately, or 450 tons a day. That sounds a lot like the 300 tons that's supposed to have always been dumped into the ocean because they're trying to kill everybody because reasons. The ocean that we're talking about, the Pacific Ocean, is 700 quadrillion tons. Dumping 1 million in it is not that hard to do. That's 700 billion to 1 change over a period of whatever period it is. It doesn't even matter if it was 2011 or 2013 as claimed. Okay. So I'm supposed to believe, for some godforsaken fucking moment, that diluted radioactive material that's in water, normally it's Not radioactive. They can just keep cycling it through. They use it for heat exchanger. That's what this was done through. That's how they cooled everything as best they could. In a damaged, not completely destroyed reactor group. Okay? But in the claimed period of time they've been storing it, it's more than the amount that's suspiciously supposed to have been dumped on purpose continually of raw radioactive material, radiation. Radiation, the vague word. Radioactive material, the just the vague word here. Instead of water that has some radioactive material in it. Okay, that's dumped each day into the ocean. 700 billion to 1 is apparently more important to people than 2% change in the atmosphere. Minimum. Well, we have an exemption because we don't want to be counted to the CO2 count. We paid our carbon credits. That's not how it works. X number of years later, we find out that it's obviously more than that being dumped into the atmosphere. But humans don't cause CO2 changes because it's only 2%. But Fukushima has to be boiling the oceans off and causing global warming because literally this is the homeopathy thing. If something's insignificant, I'm going to make it significant because I need to win an argument on the internet. That's literally what this amounts to. Let's put it back to 2011. 1 million gallons built up for, 2011, 2 more years, a couple more years. Yeah, it works out to 300 tons almost, right? But that was all dumped into the ocean. Then why the fuck would they collect it? The amount running through the whole fucking mechanism, acknowledged by Fukushima fearmongers, is that they ran 300 tons through the thing. The majority of which didn't go anywhere. It was stored because they stored 1 million. They stored 1 million gallons of completely clean water so they could dump the toxic waste into the ocean. Right? This makes fucking sense to people. Well, maybe they're not full. You can go out and check the tanks. A couple of news people did that. They looked down in it. They pointed a camera at it. You're not allowed to get over it. No, they faked the radiation because reasons. Really. 1 million tons of fluid contained that's radioactive, confirmable, must have been hauled there so they could get away with throwing more of it into the ocean for some evil moo-ha-ha-ha plan to irradiate the oceans to cause global warming. That's the assertion this week. Worst evil plan ever. Why the fuck would anybody do? Just dump a bunch of hair dryers into the ocean. Just turn on every heater. Yes, we actually do put off more carbon dioxide than your average volcanic explosion because it's not mostly that. Some volcanoes, it's mostly steam explosions, like Krakatoa, the worst one in history. And the others are literally lava. It's not just carbon dioxide or burning carbon. It's rock that's liquid. It's not the majority of what comes off. Sulfur isn't carbon. Does radiation produce heat? If I say yes, you're right about everything, huh? You said the ocean naturally filters everything to the cold sea bottom. No, it dilutes things because of the volume, because it's 700 billion to 1, and the heavy stuff falls to the bottom of the ocean, so it doesn't travel. Those are two different things, but you can squeeze them together if you need to win an argument. If this reactor has been dumping radiation since 2011 at 300 tons per day, okay, so why would they truck in another 300 tons per day just to fill up some fucking tanks to try to hide it? That doesn't make any goddamn sense. What are you talking about? That's a lot of hot radiation on a not so cold sea bottom. Diluted radioactive material and what? What's more likely to you? 1% yearly amount in the atmosphere or 700 billion to 1 in the water? I think the 1% change you've actually proven is correct. By the way, it's actually 2. It's actually much higher than that because, again, the industries that don't want global warming to exist and don't want to be regulated get exemptions so they don't get reported. Meanwhile, you can go out and test this shit. You can just go on a boat offshore and test it. None of you fuckers do this. None. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.